Hey everyone, we're going to give folks here a minute or two to come in and then we'll go ahead and kick off. Hope everyone's been having a good day. To share the research today. We'll give folks here a few more seconds and then I will go ahead and kick us off. All right, we're going to go ahead and get going then. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this important conversation as we launch the inaugural Military and Veterans Community Index, or MVCI. My name is Jon Bergdoll. I'm the Interim Director of Data and Research Partnerships at Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And I'm excited to be here with you all today alongside our panelists, Dwan Wiltshire, who is the Deputy Director of the Veterans and Military Families Program at the George W. Bush Institute and the U.S. Navy veteran, Lindsay Knight, who is the Chief Impact Officer at Blue Star Families, and Stacy Pearsall, who is the co-host of the American Legion's Tango Alpha Lima podcast, producer and host of the PBS series After Action, and the founder of the Veterans Portrait Project and a U.S. Air Force veteran. Those will be our panelists today, and they'll speak a little bit more here after we sort of run through the key findings from the report itself. Before we begin, I'd like to extend our gratitude to all active duty military members and veterans for their service, as well as to their families and the communities that support them. Your leadership in the U.S. Armed Forces is what makes conversations like this one possible. The Military and Veterans Community Index was developed by the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We're the world's first school dedicated solely to the study and teaching of philanthropy. Through research, education, and thought leadership, the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy equips funders, nonprofits, and community leaders to create positive, lasting change. The inaugural Military and Veterans Community Index provides the most comprehensive landscape of charitable organizations serving this population in the United States. Built from a decade of data covering 2013 to 2023, the MVCI is a resource for understanding trends and gaps in giving to these organizations. There are currently around 1.3 million active service members and just under 18 million living veterans in the US, yet we've yet to have a clear, comprehensive picture of how philanthropic dollars flow to them until now. This research is about transparency and opportunity, giving funders and nonprofits the information they need to close gaps and strengthen impact for military and veteran communities and their families. Next slide, please. This research was supported by an advisory council, industry experts who provided high-level strategic guidance to the research team, of which two of our panelists, Dwan Wiltshire and Lindsay Knight, are a part. As part of the council for this report, council members used their subject matter expertise to provide critical guidance and feedback on the MVCI. Their participation ensured the research was accurate, relevant, and a useful contextualized tool for military and veteran communities and their families. Just another thank you to the Military and Veterans Community Index Advisory Council for its guidance and feedback throughout the development of this work. So getting going on our findings, let's first take a look at the overall philanthropic picture. Despite the crucial work that MVCI organizations are doing in communities across the country, overall philanthropic giving to these organizations remains a very small fraction of the U.S. charitable landscape. Giving to MVCI organizations consistently accounts for less than 1% of total U.S. charitable giving, usually 0.6 to 0.7%. Said, over time, we have seen charitable giving to the military and veteran sector experience a gradual, steady growth over the past decade, reflecting a consistent philanthropic commitment. Giving to MVCI organizations totaled $3.7 billion in 2023. This is an increase from the $2.6 billion reported in 2013, and that increase is after adjusting for inflation. However, while there has been growth over that decade, it has not been a straight line. Total donations actually peaked in 2022 at just under $4 billion. Next slide, please. Our next key finding shows that the share of the overall philanthropic giving landscape for MVCI organizations has been fairly consistent. Over the time period of 2013 to 2023, giving to military and veterans organizations remained very steady at 0.6 to 0.7% of total U.S. charitable giving, closely mirroring national trends in charitable giving overall as measured by Giving USA. And you can see that on the chart there, the two lines are quite linked to each other. This shows us that MVCI organizations have not successfully captured a larger share of new philanthropic dollars over the last decade. And this is in contrast to what we have seen in other under-resourced sectors we've looked at in the Equitable Giving Lab. The growth we have seen seems to be mostly passive, reflecting the overall movement of the economy and total giving, rather than any specific breakthrough in gaining sector-specific attention or funding compared to other causes. When compared to the broader nonprofit sector, MVCI organizations operate on a smaller financial scale and have grown more slowly in key financial metrics. The report found that by most financial measurements, looking specifically at growth by revenue, expenses, and assets, MVCI organizations have grown more slowly than the broader nonprofit sector, or other peer organizations. One area, though, despite this, where we do see MVCI organizations outpacing their peers is in payroll, which we have seen grow by an inflation-adjusted 48% over that 10-year period of time. This is in contrast to about half of that among the broader. This shift parallels broader consolidation trends, including the decline of legacy membership organizations that are perhaps more often volunteer-staffed and volunteer-led, and the movement toward fewer, larger, more professionalized nonprofits that by necessity have a little bit higher paid staff. Of the various subcategories that fall within MVCI philanthropy, we found that human service organizations received the largest share of any of these categorized giving at nearly $450 million in 2023. And that does not include housing services, which we did track separately and was also fairly significant. These organizations would provide services like family support and financial assistance, received the largest share of giving in the sector, emphasizing the focus on basic needs. This category also includes foundational support like emergency financial aid, food security, and family resilience programs. The level of funding here confirms that donors prioritize addressing the essential day-to-day needs of military families and veterans who may be facing instability during or after their transition. Notably, reflecting a critical and growing national conversation around trauma and post-service care, mental health organizations within the MVCI have seen a surge in charitable support over the last decade. Funding for mental health organizations grew by 178% between 2013 and 2023, nearly tripling in real terms. In 2023, mental health services became the MVCI's second most funded sector, receiving $398 million in contributions. This highlights a philanthropic response to the escalating needs for mental health and suicide prevention services within the military and veteran community. Another interesting finding to emerge from this research is that organizations providing service animals and animal therapy saw the most rapid increase in charitable giving across all MVCI subsectors. Giving to these organizations showed the fastest growth rate, increasing by 445% from 2013 to 2023. This could indicate high donor confidence and enthusiasm for this specific intervention model. This nearly five-fold increase is the steepest growth of any subsector and likely reflects the increasing evidence and public visibility of the therapeutic benefits service animals provide, especially in combination with mental health care. The data tells a clear story. There's progress, but also opportunities for fundraisers and donors to better understand how we invest in organizations serving military and veteran communities. The MVCI isn't meant to be a report card, it's a roadmap. So here to equip all of us to make more informed funding decisions. And now I am excited to turn to our panelists who will share how this research resonates in their work and where we can go from here. I'll introduce them a little bit more fully than earlier. Dewan Wiltshire serves as Deputy Director of the Veterans and Military Families Program at the George W. Bush Institute, where he leads national initiatives to strengthen veteran well-being expand economic opportunity, and position veterans as civic assets in a strong democracy. He oversees the Employment Policy Working Group, a national effort shaping bipartisan workforce policy, and serves as a board member for Veterans for All Voters, a national organization championing election and innovations that elevate veteran voices and strengthen civic participation. A U.S. Navy veteran, Wiltshire deployed 3 times as a surface warfare officer in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Nice having you here, Dewan. Lindsay Knight is Chief Impact Officer at Blue Star Families and a social impact leader with 2 decades of experience spanning grassroots community nonprofits, multinational private sector firms, and academic and policy adjacent institutions. She received her PhD in political science from the University of Chicago with an area focus on civic responsibility, institutional change, democratic theory, and mixed methods research. Her work has been recognized with awards and fellowships from the Mellon Foundation, the Marguerite Casey Foundation, and the United Nations Chicago for achievements in innovation, industry, and infrastructure and social development. Nice having you here, Lindsay. And Stacey L. Pearsall is the co-host of the American Legion's Tango Alpha Lima podcast, producer and host of the PBS series After Action, founder of the Veterans Portrait Project, and a U.S. Air Force veteran. She began her career as an Air Force photographer at age 17, serving in 3 combat tours where she was awarded the Bronze Star Medal and the Air Force Commendation with Valor for her actions in Iraq. Following retirement from military service, she founded the award-winning Veterans Portrait Project in 2008 and has since documented over 8,500 veterans across all 50 states. Wonderful to have you, Stacey. We'll start with Lindsay. As someone who works directly with military families and tracks their experiences year over year through the Military Family Lifestyle Survey, how did the MVCI data land with you? What stood out, especially through a family-centered lens?
Awesome. Thanks for the question, John. And also really thrilled to be here. Thanks for everyone who is attending. It's a great topic to be gathered together around today. As John mentioned, I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Blue Star Families. For those of you who don't know, we are the nation's largest military and veteran family connected organization. We just notched up over 400,000 members recently. So we do a lot of work in the family engagement space. DNA and innovation is also really written into, or I should say, data and innovation is written into our DNA. So the type of information that really resonates with me with this report is specifically around mental health access and the significant uptick in philanthropic giving to that sector, along with more of the, I'm going to say, non-traditional or atypical sort of innovative support services or innovations. The service animal and animal therapy organization findings really stood out to me. Blue Star Families has been doing community-based mental health access and support through our Staff Sergeant Fox suicide prevention work that's funded by the VA for the past 3 years. We're just about to enter our 4th year of this, and it is a non-clinical, but community and veteran community and specifically targeted intervention, and it's to get ahead at upstream solutions to mental health crises. So to see that there is a broader trend to do community work, mental health focused work, and that it's a lot of that funding is really going to getting resources to families and veteran networks where they need it, I think is a great sign. Great sign for the overall sector, and just some innovative, out of the box thinking on what potential new and more effective solutions can look like.
Yeah, no, that's really great thoughts, and a good sort of reminder also that those categories aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. There's going to be, service animals that directly are in service of mental health therapy for sure. So thanks for that. Turning to Dewan, at the Bush Institute, your work focuses a lot on economic mobility, education, and helping veterans access mental health support. The MVCI shows mental health funding rising quickly, while other priorities like education and workforce development may receive comparatively less in contributions. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for philanthropy to strengthen veterans' economic mobility and long-term well-being?
So I want to pick up where Lindsay left off. First of all, I'll say I'm glad to be here with you all. So I'm really glad that you all made the time, and thank you for the invitation to contribute. So I would say it's actually a good thing that there is so much investment going into the mental health space. At the Bush Institute, we think about wellness along 3 pillars. We think about it from the space of economic opportunity, from mental wellness, but also with community connection. because there is also evidence, as we all know, that loneliness is the latest epidemic that is driving mental health. That's part of the driving force of the mental health epidemic. If you think about the other the confluencing factors, there is going to be a shortage of therapists and folks in the future. So there's going to be a need for investing in the ecosystem today, such that we can kind of mitigate the impacts of that down the road. We recognize that, we just ended a few years ago one of the, a war, and we recognize that with the more conversation really focused on mental health and bringing more people into the fold, if there aren't the therapists there to support them or they can't connect to them, it's important that philanthropy recognizes to fund the ecosystem. So I think that that's a good thing. As I mentioned, there are three pillars to health and well-being, and so I would be remiss not to say that it is not as good of a thing that funding around education and workforce development is closing. We know that investment in workforce development does lead to economic opportunity. People get opportunities, and then they create their own leadership development pipeline, and they have a career that they become proud of over time. And we also know that education helps to support that as well. So to over-index funding on the mental health delivery while also shortchanging some of the other factors that contribute to the mental health crises that we're about to step into, what actually undermines the long-term effort. So I would say that's how I think about it. That I'm glad that the philanthropic space is still contributing to the mental health. But also we can't assume that it's one or the other. There has to be a multi-pronged approach. So philanthropists should consider collective impact investing. So there are organizations, and I'll say Blue Star Families is a part of the Veteran Wellness Alliance here at the Bush Institute, where there is such a collective where folks get together and say, hey, we can reach these many people. And the reason why I think that this is really an impactful way for philanthropy to engage is because the collective actually does have a grassroots or a grass tops insight on what is needed on the ground. And so from the funder perspective, you can address the problem and also ensure effective service delivery. And I think that that's an effective model.
Those are really great insights, and I'm fascinated to hear sort of camaraderie was something we talked a lot internally about developing the report, and it's interesting to hear it sort of brought up here again. Definitely a key element of things. Stacy, you spent your career telling stories most Americans never get to hear. The MVCI gives us a look at where support's showing up and where it isn't, but it can't capture the human realities you see every day. How can nonprofits and funders pair data like this with real stories to help the public understand the more complex needs of today's veterans and military families?
It's a great question, John, and thanks for that. And hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. The one thing I can't emphasize enough is it's important to humanize the faces behind the data. Whenever I'm prepping for a new season of After Action, I have to sit down with the donors and sponsors and express why their support matters. I always lead with the question, what does a life cost? And I follow that up with a multimedia presentation of my veterans' portraits and past interviews. And I use that along with compelling statistics like the data provided with the MVCI, because putting those two together can be really dynamic and help paint a picture, especially when it comes to causes like my most recent series touched on homelessness, and we touch on mental health issues and suicide prevention. But in the end, the answer is always there's no price to put on that human life. Medias and stories can make those numbers real, and when used together, they provide incentive and motivation. And that said, I cannot emphasize this enough. Where possible, please, I encourage everyone to use real veterans stories and real veterans pictures. While many civilians won't recognize the difference between a royalty-free stock image of a model in uniform, an audience familiar with the veteran and military community likely will, and that can be a bit of a turnoff. The most compelling stories you're going to find, you can find in abundance and acquire it relatively easy. The one tip I have is utilizing the DoD's website for the dividshub.net. It has a ton of royalty-free images, videos, even story copy from active duty and veteran people. And it has a really great search engine. So that's one resource. And I think you'll provide the link in the chat box, maybe. These compelling stories can help shape that data and help put a face behind those numbers. By working with media teams from, say, American Legion and the VFW as well, you can source veterans from across the U.S. And the American Legion and VFW media teams likely have veterans that they can help you link with to help put a meaningful story behind what you're trying to do outreach-wise. And I have people reaching out to me for the Veterans Portrait Project, and I'm most willing to work with organizations. And the one caveat that I will say when I'm talking to requesters is to be thoughtful about how the images are used in terms of presentation within media. So I don't necessarily want the veterans portraits next to issues or statistics with MST or violent crime or suicide unless the veteran gives express permission. So those are things to kind of consider as well. Again, the marriage between the data and media is compelling, and most of the general public aren't exposed to the realities of military and veteran experiences outside of the carefully curated Hollywood stories, that is. And I can assure you that there's nothing more real than the real thing.
A great reminder. Thank you for that. And for those interested, we have shared the link to that in the chat. Turning back to Lindsay, Human Services received the largest share of MVCI funding, nearly 450 million in the most recent data from 2023. But overall giving to this community is still under 1% of total US charitable giving. From your perspective of leading impact of a family-focused veteran nonprofit, what needs feel most urgent for military families right now, and where could philanthropy make the biggest difference?
Yeah, great question. And I have two different but interconnected answers to that. We're obviously coming off of the heels of a government shutdown. Even though active duty families ended up getting paid, the mental stress and toll that uncertainty of a paycheck or lack thereof really does take a toll on that entire population. So in terms of urgent issues, what we saw from the Blue Star Families perspective and what our members were telling us from our chapters and in our digital community is that all of the pain points associated with a lack of financial stability, whether that is, knowing if you're going to be able to pay the rent or the mortgage next month, having food insecurity hit your family, those are all incredibly urgent and should be funded, and there should be recourse and support and resources for families undergoing those genuine crises. And here's my caveat for philanthropy. We don't have financially under-resourced or financially unstable families in a system that works. So what I would call on philanthropy to do is really focus on longitudinal support of organizations providing that infrastructure to get far, far, far ahead of those emergencies and crises. Like, no family should be food insecure. Food insecurity doesn't happen in a silo. So what are the ways that we can focus on military spouse employment? What are the ways that we can focus on more affordable and accessible childcare? What are the ways that we can focus systemically on the quality of life improvements for this population writ large? I would love for philanthropy to take the lead and say, instead of doing one-off emergency funds, to really take that long distance view on the type of support and the type of trust and the type of collaborative relationship that they need to have with organizations that are providing those services and those resources, and also voices from the field that demonstrate what those changing needs and challenges are over time, and really fund the systemic and upstream approaches to get ahead of the crises and the immediate sort of human service needs that we experience on the front lines.
Yeah, no, that's really a good reminder on things. And, I can say, as someone coming in very much from the outside at the start of this project, we definitely had more of a focus internally, like thinking on in terms of human services and basic needs, the homelessness element of things. That's what's much more present, I think, in the public consciousness. And so it was a surprise at first, but very much validated by the conversations and data that serving those other basic needs of just basic financial security and food security are the biggest draw. They are the largest sector of this, and clearly that is still, even with that being the largest sector, still a ton of need out there. That's really reinforced by the last few months. Dewan, in your recent letter to new veterans, you wrote that trust is the currency of civic life. The MVCI shows where resources flow and where gaps remain. How can philanthropy help strengthen the civic leadership veterans already bring to their communities?
Well, first of all, I like to pick up a thread again from Lindsay, just to say, like, she caught out some really good things. We talked about wellness in the beginning, right? It's a multi-pillared approach: wellness, economic opportunity, but also community connection. I think that those are three very core places that funders can think about their investment going further as it relates to civic infrastructure. The leadership, from a measurable perspective, the National Conference on Citizenship released a report just this year that called along 18 different factors that talked about how veterans are leading in their civic engagement. That's important. That goes directly to the strength of our democracy. And the fact of the matter is, what enables veterans to contribute, to engage civically, is that they aren't overburdened or overstressed by the realities of their transition, being that they would find an economic opportunity that suits them in those skill sets, or being that they can find a community where they can plug into and be allowed to kind of broaden their perspective and share their leadership experiences with the community that they um, maybe left and then went back home to as their home of record. So I would just say that philanthropy can do is to strengthen the ecosystem around leadership and the pillars of civic infrastructure that will really enable veterans to continue to engage and lead in the front from civic engagement perspective.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like a lot of the comments and conversations here are mostly reminding me of the stuff we wanted to do and couldn't figure out a good way to do. But this again, while we were working with the data, it struck us how many organizations within the index are really organizations of veterans serving their communities. And, we ultimately didn't find a great way to try to identify those organizations like the Team Rubicon or even like the American Legion Baseball League. But, they are sort of present very much throughout the entire sector. So very true. Stacy, the MVCI shows that the fastest growth in any category has been to service animal organizations, 445% increase over the last decade. You've spoken openly about your partnership with your service dog, Charlie, and how powerful that bond can be. What does this rise in giving to this subsector tell us about veterans' needs, and how can we help philanthropy see the broader spectrum of support veterans may require?
Yeah, I think it'd be easy for me to answer that question with my own experience. After I was wounded in 2007, I struggled with stability and mobility issues along with seizures due to my TBI. And so I was 27 at that time. And by the time I broke down and applied for a service dog in 2015, I was 35 and the wait list was 2 years. The demand was very high. And Charlie, by the time we got paired, he was definitely worth the wait because in 6 months, I came off seizure medication, and within a year, I wasn't having grand mal seizures anymore. He provided me freedom and independence, and something that all disabled veterans and all veterans strive to have. So, aside from the personal impact that Charlie had on my life, I was in the hospital less, thereby reducing the strain on the VA healthcare system and making me feel like less of a burden. And I tended to find that from all veterans who were paired with service animals and seeking independence. So you can see why between that and all the things that service dogs are doing, but for other disabilities like blindness, hearing loss, post-traumatic stress, military sexual trauma, these dogs are so impactful. At the end of the day, veterans just want to get back to a somewhat normal life. And in most cases, service dogs can help achieve that goal. And, being utterly independent on my husband really took an impact on my mental health. And a lot of veterans have said that to me as well. So between all of these factors, service dogs have gained in popularity. And it costs $50,000 between the breeding and the care and the training for those dogs over the 2 years on average it takes to train these dogs, and the increase of visibility of service dogs in public have also grown that. So between the demand and visibility, you can kind of put a finger on the pulse of why service dogs are gaining such popularity. With that said, veterans who have qualifying disabilities qualify to apply for VA healthcare support. Again, only those who qualify, disability-wise. And that health insurance helps offset the cost of the dog's health care. Now, veterans are still paying out of pocket for the dog's support in terms of food and things like that. Veterans who don't qualify in terms of the disability have to pay for those medical bills on their own. And as you can imagine, many veterans who are homebound or have disabilities that preclude them from going outside or other things of that nature can't necessarily afford that. So it'd be interesting to see how the nonprofit sector adjusts to offset the financial burden that it puts on those veterans who have service dogs that are trying to gain independence, but may be inhibited and unrestricted incomes. But at the end of the day, the demand for service dogs is high, but it directly correlates, like in my case, the positive and successful impacts that they've had on my life. And again, being front facing and very public, like little walking billboards, and who doesn't love a dog? Let's be honest. They're gonna definitely have a high popularity.
Well, for sure. I certainly resisted, being like, oh, let me see pictures of Charlie. Yeah, he's very, I'm sure he's very sweet and cute. I love dogs. I'll toss out there also, when we were developing, finalizing the data on this report, that service animal finding was definitely the one that sort of took me off guard the most of seeing that really increase. But it's been really fascinating since putting that finding out there and, talking with people more, really just hearing the stories and hearing the validation of just how important and why that is that's growing, and it's not just a fluke or anything. This is clearly a need that is relevant and really, really impactful. Well, as we close up sort of this more limited panel discussion before we turn to audience questions, I will go ahead and sort of do a round robin question for all three of our panelists. How would you like to see nonprofits use data like the MVCI to better engage with their audiences or attract new audiences to help support the military and veteran communities? And just to get started, I'll kick it over to Dewan.
Yeah, I actually like what you said at the beginning, that the MVCI is a compass, or it's a roadmap. I would love for funders to think about it in that way. There is an opportunity for alignment here as well. You can see when you look at the data how all the money are going to certain service, and some of the funders might think, okay, well, we're putting all this money into the space. Why isn't the problem getting better? Well, part of that could be about alignment and duplication of efforts. And if you lean on roadmaps and such as the MVCI to think about that, there might be opportunity for alignment that could allow for a greater impact for investment. Um, and then, you know, I also think it's important to use these kind of data informed projects to make sure that as a funder, you aren't chasing the shiny object that you think might be the panacea to some problem that you see. So those are the two things that I would lead with, is just to continue to be data informed in the philanthropy space. I know that you guys are doing that generally very well. And then also use the MVCI as a compass or a roadmap for possibilities for alignment. There are other conferences and convenings that do that pretty well. The Philanthropy Roundtable comes to mind, first of all, for me. But this is another such effort that I think can steward the same type of outcome.
Lindsay?
Yeah, thanks, John. Well, first of all, a +1 to everything that Dewan just said. The only other thing that I would add, and honestly, I'm gonna piggyback off of your last answer, Stacy, is that I think what is really interesting and helpful to look at in these trends are frankly emerging trends and a changing scene of philanthropy and programs over time. The fact that service animals and animal therapy had a 445% growth over the past 10 years. One, that's not an accident, and to Dewan's point, that's not a shiny new object. That's something that works, and it's something that all of the MSOs and VSOs in this space are hearing directly as a need from their members, and that is then informing where we work with philanthropies to say, no, this is the area that needs to be funded because it addresses X, Y, and Z. And by the way, it also brings joy to people's lives. Was there anyone on this call that wasn't smiling when Stacy was talking about her service animal? Like, but seriously, I say that in all truthfulness. There is, I think those emerging trends also demonstrate how care, how human services, how emotional and mental and physical support also don't have to only exist in very traditional or tried and true or potentially even stigmatized or charity in scare quotes. Like it can be good things, it can bring joy to people's lives, it can be a support. And I just ask anyone on the philanthropic side, on the research or piloting side, or on the program side, look at this, see the trends, and think about what things could be a need or a trend or an opportunity in the next 10 years' time.
John, I hate to say it, but I think Dewana and Lindsay hit the nail on the head. I don't think I have anything more articulate that could lend to that conversation at all. Like, great.
May I add one extra thing? And actually, Stacy would have said this. So this is for her, is that the list of names at the front of the report are folks that could help advise on what those 10-year trends could look like. So rather than just having a crystal ball and trying to think about what might come, we're steeped in this work every day. From some of us grassroots level, and in my case, more of on a legislative level, but the reality is we're steeped here. And so it's a partnership. The investment doesn't have to come only through funds, but it can also come through connections and relationships that kind of, help us do something together.
That's all great. Thank you all. And we'll open it up here to some questions that have been coming in by the chat, and folks feel free to continue to ask those questions as we go. I'll start off with a question for Stacy. This is from Allison Coughlin. A question for storytelling. My organization is discussing how phrases such as food insecurity and housing instability are somewhat dehumanizing and too academic to truly encompass the pain and need these communities have. How should we orient our storytelling to be human first?
That's a really great question. That's from Allison, you said, John?
Yes, Allison Coughlin, if I'm getting the last name right.
Hi, Allison. I struggle with words because they have power, and it's important to know where you're directing that sword. And oftentimes what I'll do is I will actually look to the veteran to let them come up with the words that best describe them. And like I said, recently did in season 3 an episode on homelessness. And one of the veterans liked to refer to his current situation as home full. And so, yes, housing insecurity can kind of be a little bit clinical. So finding ways to humanize that and it can be a challenge. But think of yourself in that situation and find words that could best describe what does housing insecurity look and feel like. It's not necessarily being in a box under an overpass. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're couch surfing and things like that. So what does that look like and feel like, and see if you can, tease out words that would best describe those experiences. But again, you can always lean on the veteran community that are going through those experiences. If you're candid with them, they're going to be candid with you, and oftentimes the solution's right there with them and their own words.
Thank you for that, Stacy. I'll turn to a question for Dewan. This is from Richard Rodriguez. Working at a philanthropy-centered org and being on the board of my local American Legion, it seems like the interest in veteran causes as it pertains to the general population is waning, and he can't seem to pinpoint why. If philanthropy needs to take the lead, what does this look like to broaden interest and speak more to these systemic issues we're facing?
Two things. Number one, the interest is waning, but that's not a surprise. It's because the number of veterans in the community is also waning. If you go back historically, there's a more of a representation of veterans who are in the community. So when people talk about the military experience, the veteran experience, they can look at their neighbor Dewan and say, "Oh yeah, Dewan was in the Navy," and you have those kind of stories to kind of resonate and make it more palatable for people. And then the second thing, the reality is we're not in wartime. And the reality is it's easier to fundraise in wartime. And almost going back to Stacy's point, or the question that was asked to Stacy around humanizing the veteran story, funders, philanthropists, please hear me. You do have to be very careful about how you tell a story, because I do recognize that at the end of the day, you do want to raise funds, and it is emotionally resonant to tell stories that might push the envelope just a little bit. And you kind of have to resist that urge too. So I would say those are the two things that are driving that are driving that piece. Could you repeat the last part of the question though, John?
Yes. If philanthropy needs to take the lead, what does this look like to broaden that interest and speak more to those systemic issues that the veteran community is facing?
Yeah, and I think that the best way to do that is to allow the veteran community to lead through their strengths. And then right now, their strength is civic engagement. That is just the reality. Veterans as civic assets really would enable the veteran story to kind of take off in a way that makes it more resonant for the everyday citizen. Dewan, for example, I volunteer very regularly. I don't necessarily have on my Navy gear or any of that I'm just a veteran and I volunteer. I'm one of those statistics. It would go further for philanthropy to enable that and connect with VSOs and MSOs who are doing some phenomenal work around the country and help them tell their stories. That's expensive. So honestly, that's a great place for philanthropy to play is in the communication world.
And as it's a pretty broad question, I'll actually broaden this out. And Lindsay and Stacy, if either of you have thoughts you'd want to share on that question, please go ahead.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
No, I was going to say no additional comments. I thought Dewan answered it more than sufficiently from my perspective.
Same.
All right. I'll put another plug in if anyone wants to ask more questions. Feel free to. We did get one question in. I'll take the first sort of crack at this one as it pertains sort of to dollars and whatnot. This is questions coming from Jethro Miller. How does major giving to military and veterans organizations compare to major giving to other kinds of organizations versus lower level giving, which we know has been decreasing in recent years? And this is a really perceptive question. And I will say this is something that following putting together this report, we're definitely planning to look more deeply into. And I'm going to sneak some questions on this into some of our survey work to get more at this, because I will say somewhat anecdotally, though based on data, over the years of looking at various surveys and various work and data on nonprofits, fairly consistently, veterans has been something that has come up among a more general population concept of philanthropy. Supporting veterans orgs is often in like their top 5 or top 10, of sort of things, a lot of times above other things that might get more dollars overall, like arts and culture. And it's actually interesting to see service animals so strong here, because that's the other one of those where we see a really strong general population inclination toward it that maybe doesn't get reflected in the larger data. And I think to some degree, I wonder about the lack of movement for that percent of overall giving, how we don't see that increasing quite the same way we have with the other under-resourced communities, is maybe related to this a little bit, because a trend in broad philanthropy over the past 20 years that really does not show signs of decelerating anytime soon is the whole donors down, dollars up phenomenon, where a smaller and smaller group of large donors are increasingly responsible for a larger and larger share of giving. And if we do see that veterans in nonprofits and veterans issues is something that is disproportionately of interest to the general population, ironically for philanthropy, that will hurt it, because where the money is coming from is disproportionately not the general population, and increasingly so. But I do want to turn it over to our panelists who actually work in this and know what they're talking about on a much more direct level than I do from behind a computer screen, and get their thoughts on this.
Lindsay, would you mind taking that one first?
Yeah, I can't. I was actually trying to bring up some stats that Blue Star Families had on this one. The only thing I will say, John, on a conceptual and like systems basis, I don't disagree with any of the trends that you just highlighted. But one of the things that we have noticed at Blue Star Families, it's particularly with civilian or everyday American populations that aren't veteran or military family connected. We see it a little bit differently in terms of the giving opportunity or funding opportunity, or maybe more of a general description of why that funding has dried up over the past few decades. We did a survey, this would have been May of 2023, May of 2024. I will get everyone the survey and circulate the link. But it was essentially asking a representative sample of the American population their thoughts on the trust and duty, the trust they felt toward military and veteran families, and the duty and responsibility they felt towards military and veteran families. And what we discovered in that survey, which we did in partnership with YouGov as a poll, was that American civilians, so military families and veteran families' neighbors, actually held incredibly high trust levels in military and veteran families themselves. It was something like 90%, or they held a 90% trust value in this population. We also then asked, do you think military and veteran families deserve to be supported as a result of their service? 83% said yes. We then drilled down a little bit more. Are you doing something to support military and veteran families as a result of that service? And then it went down to, roughly a third of the population said yes. And also we know, because it's a self-reported sample, that's still probably a little bit high. People like to say they do things even if they don't necessarily do them. But then the last question we asked in the survey is, do you think there is a need or a responsibility for the American population to support military and veteran connected families as a result of their service? And over 78% said yes. So the way Blue Star Families is sort of approaching this from a grassroots and a chapter-led basis is there is an absolute want and need on your neighbor's part or the American population writ large's part to be part of this solution, but they do not know how to plug into it. Like, what is the opportunity to give back? Is that philanthropic? Is it volunteer hours? Is it hosting a welcome week party in your local community, or welcoming a military family into their new school? Like, it can be really, really small, and it can also have philanthropic effect. So that is an area as an organization that we are really exploring. Like, we know there's a want. We need to provide the opportunity, and I think that's a sector-wide call to action there. But I don't think interest in military and veteran families are drying up. I think there is a lack of knowledge of how to plug in.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that we one of our more recently released reports from late September was the Bank of America, Lilly's edition of the Bank of America High Net Worth Philanthropy Study, and something we found there was that younger generation, and these are still high net worth households, but kind of on the lower end of things, the younger folks, there is a huge desire for more knowledge and just to figure out where to give, where to support, whether or not that, you can have the cynical view of, is that an excuse or is that, but regardless, there's at least that reported sort of desire for a greater level of knowledge and just, where to give to make the most difference and everything. Dawn, that's
This is just a random thought that popped in my head. I'd just be so curious to learn if there is any type of data-informed ladder of engagement for folks who say, "Hey, I'm a civilian, I want to engage." And as you just heard Lindsay outline, you can engage on a micro level, and if you have deeper pockets, you can engage on a more macro level. But I'd be willing to bet that someone who engages at a lower level and they kind of receive some kind of positive feedback that was positive for them in an emotionally way, they'll likely start to engage at higher levels. So it could make sense that, someone in the veteran space starts to kind of codify a ladder of engagement in a way that will allow folks to say, hey, if you want to start to engage at the veteran space at the lowest level, that's $20 to the American Legion and Blue Star, and here's why that matters, because whatever the story might be. It's just interesting. I never thought about a ladder of engagement in that way, because I didn't think that, the general public felt that it'd be difficult to engage with and support the veteran community.
Yeah, for sure. We consistently hear that sort of desire for knowledge on engagement opportunities, and to sort of double down on your point, we also consistently see where generous behaviors reinforce each other. Giving leads to more giving, volunteering leads to giving, giving leads to volunteering, all that jazz. If you start doing one of these things, it just becomes likelier that you're going to be doing more of them. So definitely a good thought there on the ladder of engagement. We can close here with a question to Lindsay. Well, this is very much related to sort of what we were just talking about. You're talking about the sort of potential ladder of engagement, not to put you too much on the spot here. But, if someone did want to support military families more effectively, what is one area you'd sort of single out for paying more attention to? What maybe is that bottom run ladder of engagement sort of thing?
I'm going to flip your question a little bit because I actually think there's I'm going to go back to philanthropic giving as a sector and institutional actors, because as much as I would love individuals and neighbors across the country to do their part in all of this, and they absolutely should, I actually think the responsibility for sector-wide engagement and organization and population-wide engagement really does lay a couple responsibility levels up. And I would say two things on this, and I think it's something that you've heard from all three panelists today, and that is look at what innovative solutions actually work and have genuinely impactful and new and worthwhile impact in the community. Like how are we addressing needs that haven't perhaps the need hasn't changed over the last few decades, which also means like the thing we've been trying to solve for that need for is maybe a little bit stale. What are some new approaches to solve for those long-lasting challenges encountered by this population? And then dig in and be curious and figure out, why does it work? How did this idea come about? How is the community and population's voice involved in shaping that program? And then how do we think of scaling it? That's one sort of approach for how we can do this work more effectively, or a call to action on the part of people that want to do more of this work. The next one is, and Dewan pointed to this a little bit earlier in one of his responses, is coalition and partnership work. Every organization in the MSO and VSO space does not need to recreate the wheel to be an expert in absolutely everything that comes down the pipeline. And many of us really enjoy partnering with other folks in this sector to bring those expertise to the table and really have a communal response to whatever that challenge is. I'll shout out two of Blue Star Family's programs as sort of an example of this. Our suicide prevention work with the VA is also in partnership with TAPS and Psych Armor and Spiritune and the American Red Cross and so on and so forth. And they're formal grantee partners of ours in that work. The same thing with our Military Family Outdoors program. It's funded through DHA, but we partner with Wilderness Inquiry, we partner with Armed Services WISE, we partner with National Park Service. Like, we can't do this work alone, and nor do we want to. So I think if I can leave anyone here in the research of philanthropic space to ponder something, it's who are the coalitions or the right organizations in the room to get a novel approach or an impactful approach done, and then look at bringing together those groups, but also funding those groups as a whole, which also sort of gets rid of that scarcity conflict within the nonprofit and public sector world.
And to sort of close things up, I'll sort of let our other two panelists, if they want to weigh in on that same question here, and then we'll close things out.
Can I weigh in on a separate question? It had just come in, and a thought had come up around celebrities and philanthropy. I think one thing that as we leave today, I really want funders and philanthropists to think about is, who is the bullhorn for certain fundraising efforts. You led off saying that the charitable giving is less than 1%, and as a number, that feels quite striking. At the same time, I'm curious on whether or not that is enough, because it might be, depending on, how well it's being used and the ROI, things of that nature. The bigger point that I'm trying to say here is, as you think about your giving strategy, consider the groups of veterans who actually don't get the big dollars, the big funds, and things of that nature, because they don't have celebrity endorsements and you don't hear about them. So there isn't an opportunity to do a little bit more digging to deliver your resources to places that might deliver just as much of an efficient program or a service, or maybe even better, because they're more connected to the ground. And so take that for what you will, but that's how I see the landscape. And I really And I'll just end it here for me, just to say I really do appreciate this opportunity to have engaged with this group of people. I mean, it's just been incredible, and to talk to you guys for the past hour or so. Should I be helpful to any one of you, or I love to connect via LinkedIn as well. So I'll leave mine there and pass it on to my fellow co-panelists.
Can you refresh my about what the original question was?
Oh, we're just kind of like, if there's one thing you'd like to see people do to support the military and veterans community, sort of a catch-all.
From my perspective, oftentimes veterans are displayed as a caricature of ourselves, and always displayed as being broken. And if we can change that narrative within within nonprofit organizations, within fundraising, because as I said before, words matter. I think Dewan and Lindsay did a great job sort of painting a picture about philanthropy and funds and where money is going. But at the heart of everything in this is the veteran community, and the issues that they are facing, we are facing on a daily basis. And it's important that we're represented in a thoughtful way. Even though these issues are real and can be very difficult, it's still important to remember that they are humans at the end of the day. And I can't thank each and every one of you for all that you're doing in supporting the veteran community, and for all the veterans who are tuned in doing this philanthropy work, because I know you're out there. Thank you for your service.
But a great note to end on. Yes, thank you. Thanks to the three panelists here, and thank you for everyone who has attended. I do hope that this has been helpful and enlightening for folks. We'll close up here. We will be sharing a recording as well as some of the resources that have been mentioned during this call, as well as the report itself, and a follow-up email after things close out here. But for now, I will just sign off here and thank everyone for attending. This was fun for me. I love this work, so I was happy to have this. Thank you all very much.